configuring your new MacBook Pro. What are the considerations? This is MacVoices. MacVoices is sponsored by Upstart, fair and fast personal loans. Go to upstart.com/MacVoices and find out how Upstart can lower your monthly payments. Today's edition of MacVoices is supported by Truebill. Get control of your subscriptions at truebill.com/MacVoices. Welcome to MacVoices. This is the talk of the Apple community, and I'm Chuck Joyner. This is part 2 in a 2-part MacVoices live discussion. This time, we get into a debate about configuring a new MacBook Pro and some of the considerations that should go into that decision, and the panel discusses and sometimes disagrees on what the most important factors are when choosing your configuration. Let's go back and let them do the talking.
Well, I was going to say that, Apple didn't have anything in that high-end space for a long time. I mean, it's been pretty obvious that you shouldn't buy a high-end laptop for probably at least 2 years. So I think there's a lot of pent-up demand, a lot of people that, so what we're seeing now is, there's a lot of people that were waiting and they were like, the minute this comes out, I'm ordering it. So, that doesn't mean that, this is going to be the sustained demand for these products. I'm sure there's some people that are buying them that just because they can afford them and ego and whatnot, but I doubt if that's the majority of it. And, you could say that like, nobody needs a Jaguar or, Ferrari or whatever. But there's a market for that. Yeah, they're nice machines. There are people that are gonna, flip side, I was one of those people that was waiting and I couldn't wait anymore. And so in June, I bought an M1 13-inch Pro. And I think for now, I'm just going to stick with that. It's, still better than what I had before. And, I don't know, maybe I'll wind up at an Apple store at some point in the next 6 months and change my mind. But I'm not ordering one for now. And, and I'm a little bit like, one thing, things like, Xcode is probably the biggest thing for me. And that's where core, the single core speed is really critical. And it didn't actually go up that much. It's, these are still M1s. I was a little bit disappointed, that we're not seeing, like, it's not even using the A15 technology yet. So, maybe the next fall will be the M2 and that'll be exciting. I may not wait, but we'll see. But this M1 13-inch is pretty damn nice. So, but I do tend to like Macs. Like I obviously bought 16 gig memory for that, and because I tend to keep machines for 4 to 6 years. So, and you can't expand them anymore. So, if I did get one, I would probably pretty close to max it out.
Could you dig into your memory and maybe quantify the sort of performance difference you've seen from, tell us what you were, I guess, working or compiling with, before moving to, that Mac Pro this June?
Well, actually, I'm just in the process of doing the move right now. So I'm still, I had a 2016, I guess it's an i7, which I was pretty happy with. I'm also like, I'm doing my development in Objective-C, not Swift. And it turns out that ironically, the Objective-C compiler is much faster than the Swift compiler. So, people that are using Swift are like, they're really, they're still slower than, but I have found like my project, if it builds about 3 times faster on this machine than it did on the Intel machine. They both had 16 gig of memory, and but it actually doesn't really matter much to me, because most of the time when I'm doing, I make a few changes and do a build. That is not a full build. I only do a full build, 2 or 3 times a week. So that, I think, took 40 seconds before, and now it takes 18 or something like that. But most of the time when I do a change, it's more like 2 seconds. So, it's like, oh, okay, now it's 1.5, or, I went from like 3 to 1.8, or, but who cares?
So you can stay in the zone. You don't. Your mind doesn't wander onto other things.
I've been doing this a long time. I remember, back in the 80s, doing things where you'd have a 15-minute turnaround, and I used to read novels while I was waiting for the computer to do compiles. So those days are over. Now you can't even read a tweet.
So let me pull the chat room in here, because there are a lot of interesting comments being made. So I'm going to just take them in order, and then we can comment on them when we finish. Brad says 256 gig on a MacBook Air is too small, but the 512 gig SSD on the new MacBook Pro is okay for some people. That's really interesting. I mean, I see your point, but I guess my reaction is that's probably the easiest thing to recover from if you bought too small. It's just
Right.
limit your system to your SSD, and you can plug in all kind of external storage, either super fast Thunderbolt or NAS or whatever.
And
go ahead.
I'm gonna contest that a little bit, because it's a MacBook Air. So who wants to lug around an external drive with their MacBook Air? I don't. So I think if you think you need the space, you would be better off buying it and having it inside the box than having an external that you got to, if it's an iMac, yeah, sure, plug in, tons of stuff, and or if maybe it's a laptop that you're going to use as a desktop most of the time. But probably if you're buying an Air, that's because you wanted it to be portable. And adding an external like that is, really going to make it super inconvenient.
No, good point. Fair point.
Yeah.
But he also says there's a new rub, and this is really interesting to me. You used to use, excuse me, let me try again. There's a new rub. You used to buy a machine for the long run, but Apple Silicon may mean even faster progress, and you may not want a Mac for a long time anymore. There could be more turnover, more like the iPhone has seen. So yeah, I mean, at some point, you're going to have a hard time justifying constantly laying out this super big dollars for a faster machine, unless you have a situation where you can turn that time you save into money, like Jim is doing. Because there's a big difference between reading a novel versus not being able to read a tweet. Things are so fast.
Well, that's over 35 years. That's not...
Well, still, but we don't know what we're going to see. There all of a sudden there seems to be this big boost in processor technology, and was this just a blip and things will calm down to a little more orderly pace, or will we see some of these, continue to see some of these amazing jumps?
Well, I'll check in on that, because I think that. One thing we've seen, basically for the Mac Pros is they're really taking full advantage of the 5 nanometer process technology that TSMC is giving them, and you can see basically the 2 processor variants. They basically they supersize it, so they double the amount of everything, cores, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And there's starting to be a little bit of chatter out there about next generation, from 5 to 4 nanometers, and from traditional semiconductor sort of cycles. That's sort of an odd step. Normally they go about 60% smaller, which would be a 3 nanometer technology. And in the past couple of days, there's been some chatter about that. So basically, what that means is you can essentially, for the same size die, you can double the amount of stuff within it. So instead of having 75 or 76 billion transistors, they could, get to 150 billion transistors, which means, they can double again the amount of cores and memory and everything else. So I think that's a pretty conservative set of estimates for what MacBook or Mac Pros will look like 2-3 years down the line from now. To me, the more interesting thing is if they do any other innovations. Like here, I think last year and then this year is the first time I had remember seeing that they talk about the bandwidth of their SSD drive. Last year was 3 something. This year they were saying I think it was 7.8 or 7.5 or something like that. And that's important because all of these things all rise at once, and you need to have everything balanced, right? How fast do you throw data at your processor? How fast can that get it out of DRAM? How fast can that get it out of your main storage? That you have all these multiple moving bottlenecks. Ideally, everything could be the same speed, all at once, and unfortunately, that's just not possible. But they're able to get way more performance. And when was it? Was it 10 years ago? I think it was still under Steve Jobs, right? So when Apple announced their Grand Junction technology, which is the ability to have really fine-grained parallelism that something needs to be done, just throw it at an available core, be it in the processor or be it at the GPU. So we're starting to see the benefits at a system level of the collection of the benefits of all these different improvements. So I'm thinking for pros who really need to render a lot of video and things like that over the next 2 to 5 years that there is a potential for some really exciting systems coming out from Apple that will just blow people away. And like Jim said earlier, for the past 2 or 3 or maybe more years, it's been clear that at the high end, Apple's been hitting performance gain limits, as a result of Intel processors and Intel silicon. Well, they've freed themselves of that, so it's going to be a really exciting future. Although I can admire all of those things, that doesn't match a lot of my workload. So I'll admire them for their engineering capability, but for me, sort of MacBook Air, entry level MacBook Pros, suit what I need.
I think.
Go, Jim.
I think the jump over the last, that we've seen in the last year is it's a jump, and it's going to keep going up, but it's not going to keep going up the way it did over the last year. A lot of that is because of architectural stuff that Apple made some decisions that are different than what Intel. Intel was sort of like dragged down by this legacy of basically 40 years. Like they're dragging around compatibility with all kinds of old x86. The latest chips can still run 386 and even 286 and x86 code. So they've got all this extra complexity that they have to drag along for software compatibility. So, Apple just jettisoned all that, and, we control the whole widget. We control the compilers. And so they were able to do things like, a big part of it is like they're using much wider bus widths than Intel uses. So I think now they're up to 512-bit between the CPUs and the memory. So I think that stuff is actually a bigger reason for these performance gains than the actual silicon stuff, the actual silicon technology. And, those are kind of, they're not going to be able to repeat that again. I mean, they may, who knows? Maybe they'll use 1,000 bits at some point. But
yeah, well,
there's going to be a certain diminishing return. So, they're still going to, they're going to be able to do better silicon. But I think the big jump was that they were able to, discard all this legacy crap that Intel had to drag along, and so Intel couldn't really make these leaps. And basically, the stuff that was an advantage for Intel for a long time, which was basically that there was all this software. It's like you go buy a Windows box, you can still run DOS software on it. From 1992, and it doesn't have to have been recompiled. And that's sort of something that was a priority. But there's a cost to that. And Intel just kept saying we're going to we can't afford to drop compatibility, for one thing, because they didn't control the whole widget. That people would be mad at them. Where looking back, this is Apple telegraphed this when they dropped 32-bit support in Catalina. It's like, why did they do that? Well, that was totally telegraphing that ARM was coming, because they're like, we're dumping all this legacy crap. We're moving forward, and we're not going to support any of this old stuff. And now we're, people at the time, a lot of people were like, whoa, why is Apple? They're killing me here. Well, they got that killing me part out of the way. Although I'm sure there's some people that are still mad about it, but they knew what they were doing, and now we're reaping the benefit of what they've done. It's pretty cool.
MacVoices is sponsored by Upstart, fair and fast personal loans. Go to upstart.com/MacVoices and find out how Upstart can lower your monthly payments. Whether it's paying off credit cards, consolidating high-interest debt, or funding personal expenses, over 1 million people have used Upstart to get one fixed monthly payment with a clear payoff date. Upstart doesn't just look at your credit score, but also at other factors like your income, current employment, and credit history to find you a smarter rate for your loan. Find out what that rate is in minutes without impacting your credit score for loans between $1,000 and $50,000. And once you accept the loan, you can receive your funds in as little as 1 business day. Find out how Upstart can lower your monthly payments today when you go to upstart.com/MacVoices. That's upstart.com/MacVoices. Don't forget to use my URL to let them know I sent you. Loan amounts will be determined based on your credit, income, and certain other information provided in your loan applications. Go to upstart.com/MacVoices. Thanks to Upstart for their support of MacVoices. This edition of MacVoices is supported by Truebill. Get control of your subscriptions at truebill.com/MacVoices. What do you spend on subscriptions each month? Most of us think we spend around $80 per month on subscriptions, but we actually spend closer to $200 per month. Truebill is the new app that lets you identify and stop paying for subscriptions you don't need, want, or simply forgot about. It helps you discover hidden, unwanted subscriptions and cancel them with just one click. Over 80% of people have subscriptions they've forgotten about. Are you one of them? I bet you are. Or maybe it's one of those free trials that renew without notice or your consent. They can cost you big time. Truebill gives you the power to see all your subscriptions in one place, keep the ones you want, cancel the ones you don't, right from the app. Start canceling your unused subscriptions at truebill.com/MacVoices. Go right now. Truebill.com/MacVoices. It could save you thousands a year. Truebill.com/MacVoices. Thanks to Truebill for their support of MacVoices.
That's true. I think you're a little heavy-handed in saying it's only architectural changes, because a lot of those architectural changes were enabled by the process technology that they're getting by partnering with TSMC. And for example, for a long time, the benefit of going to 64 bits, it's not that Word or Excel needs a 64-bit address space. It's just way much faster, because you can bring way more data in to your processor over a 64-bit bus than you can over a 32-bit bus. So people have been getting performance gains by increasing the speed of the size of the buses for a long time. But I think Jim, I think the most interesting thing you said there is Apple, because they have the entire stack, they are able to jettison old useless crap. And also that's in their DNA, where it's not in Intel's DNA or Microsoft's DNA, where they're struggling along with, I think the dirty little secret is how many tens of millions of XP, Windows systems are out there that barely have any support and are huge attack vectors. So, Apple is very clear, that they've focused, and again, there are pluses and minuses to their strategy, and their products are not appropriate for all environments, as David will tell us. But they've culturally aligned themselves with riding the best, latest, or the newer technology to move forward.
They are forward leaning.
They're forward leaning. They're not necessarily the bleeding edge, but this old legacy stuff. It's clear they just don't want to deal with it.
I can tell you on your point, Mark, about machines that are in the enterprise for Macs. You're going to see more and more enterprises want to use Macs as opposed to Linux boxes because of security. Information security is such a huge thing. Cyber risk is just so huge. Why would you want to have to manage a Linux box and try to help support it when you have such an easy platform in the way Mac is, and Mac can easily do whatever a Linux box does and of what their needs are. So you're going to see more and more Macs in that environment of the need. But you're also going to start seeing, you're starting already seeing more Macs in the environment continuing on. So it just keeps evolving.
Yeah. A couple of things that I want to point out here. First of all, to try to cut through some of the geekery talk, at the end of the day, the speed is dependent on the slowest part of the chain. That's right. Where the bottleneck is going to be. So wherever that is, that kind of simplifies things down. You have to speed everything up. Speeding up just one thing doesn't help it. I do once in a while. I like to point out the fact that we're talking about 7 nanometers, 4 nanometers, 5 nanometers, 3 nanometers. Pretty soon there's going to be no nanometers left. And B, to just give you an idea of what size that is, the human hair is between 80,000 and 100,000 nanometers wide. So we're talking about really, really, really little stuff here. To go back to
I remember 10, 15 years ago when they were like, oh, we're at the end of it. We're not going to be able to make it any smaller. We are getting at the point where features on the chips are dozens of atoms. And, I'm kind of puzzled because I remember 10 years ago, they were saying quantum effects were already a problem. And yet we've still, it hasn't moved as fast as it, did from, say, 1980 to 2000 or 1970 to 2000. It's slowed down some, but it's still getting smaller. At some point, it is going to be, that's it. No more smaller. But they keep saying we're there, and we're not quite there yet.
And they keep going down.
I want to disagree with a little bit with your slowest link in the chain thing, because I think that really depends on what the application is. There are some applications that are disk bound and the CPU speed doesn't matter at all. And there are other applications where CPU speed is totally critical and the disk doesn't matter at all. It really depends on what you're doing. There are some applications that are amenable to parallelism, which is what Mark was mentioning, but a lot of applications aren't. So that's like basically, can the task be split up into multiple things and be done at the same time, and so you can do it multiple times faster. So things like video processing, that works really well. You can take video processing and split it up, and you can just throw more GPUs and you just make it faster and faster and faster. But a lot of things like an Excel spreadsheet, you can't do that, or compiling code. You can't do that. It's sequential. You have to do one thing before the other, and it doesn't really help to throw more cores at it. And it doesn't matter what parallelism. Parallelism is sort of like a great white whale in programming. I remember when I started in the late 70s, that was something people are like, oh, we're going to figure out parallelism and, computers are going to be 100 times faster. And we're in 2021. And in the general purpose case, that has never happened.
You mean we can't impregnate 9 women and have a baby in a month?
Well, that's the old mythical man month, which is usually applied to programming deadlines.
Hey, I'm going to put Jim in the box for a minute. Mark in the box for a minute. To circle back, though, to an earlier point that we were talking about, buying versus waiting. Webb asks, is there an argument that the previous MacBook Pro customers get scared away from the butterfly keyboard and the missing function keys? The butterfly kept me away. So, that's an interesting point, Webb, that there were certain, it's not just the CPUs we're talking about. The butterfly keyboard did intimidate a lot of people.
But it's been gone for a couple of years now.
Yeah, but still, it kept him from making a purchase.
But so they did replace the butterfly keyboard a couple of years ago.
Eventually. Yeah. So you can find reasons not to buy, and Brad is, I'm not even going to pretend to try to relate everything Brad's doing into the chat room.
I was going to see if you were going to do that.
No. He's throwing in a lot of geekery, but I think at the end of the day, Jim makes a real good point, and Mark kind of made it. And this is why I really shy away from benchmarks. Benchmarks are fun, but I really want to put my hands on it and see what I do with it, how it improves what I do with it. And so, I can say, my M1 Air, it definitely improved my workflow. What will happen with the M1 Max? I can't wait to find out. But everything is telling me, and I hope it's not building up my hopes, but everything is telling me that it should be just phenomenal. So we shall see.
Brad thinks he's listening. Brad thinks he's listening to the Accidental Tech podcast.
Oh, and Paul, do you have a delivery date for your machine?
I'm hoping tomorrow, Mark, is what it's looking like. So by the time we gather again, I should have had my hands on it.
Okay.
Mine not till the end of the month.
I'm sorry, David. Yeah. Well, as I said at the top of the show, I've got a bit of a heart out tonight. So I'm going to wrap it up and say thank you all for your participation here. We got a bit deeper into the tech stuff than we usually do, but it's still good to do some of that and maybe leave some of the higher level stuff or more casual stuff for another night. So let's go around the room, let folks know where they can find you, and then we're going to get out of here. So yes, I'm going to take the reverse and start with Mr. Mark Fuccio. Mark, where can folks find you?
Twitter at Mark Fuccio, MarkFuccio. Excellent.
Thank you, Mark. Good to have you. Jim Ray, thank you for the developer's insight. It's always good to listen to you and Mark argue. I love it. Where can we find you?
I'm glad you like it. Proview.com, PROVUE, and Proview Jim on Twitter.
Excellent. Thanks, Jim. Last but absolutely not least, and I will say again, if you're into betas, you want to listen to his show, David, where can folks go to find you and hear that show?
In Touch with iOS at intouchwithios.com. I don't know if we would go too deep into it, but we dabble. But you can find me there. And you also find our YouTube channel at youtube.com/DaveG65. I'm on the Mac Show on Fridays, and I'm on Twitter at DaveG65. Thanks for a great show, Chuck.
Thank you, David. Thank you. And Webb, Brad, you have nothing to apologize. The engineer showing through is just fine. It's just
awesome.
It's hard to keep up with it at times. And Webb says that his MacBook Pro arrives Friday. So
nice.
Webb, maybe you and I can compare some notes as to what do we think.
Yeah.
So folks, this is Mac Voices Live. We do this Tuesday nights, 8 p.m. Eastern, 5 p.m. Pacific, whatever time that is, wherever you are. We'd love to have you join us in the chat room, whether you're an engineer like Brad or not. Feel free to express your opinions and thoughts because we don't always have all the good ones, no question about it. Until next week, I'm Chuck Joyner. Thanks for watching. Visit MacVoices.com for show notes and to connect with Chuck on social media. Get involved in our Facebook group or like our Facebook page, and get more out of your Apple tech with MacVoices magazine, free on Flipboard and on the web. And if you find value in it all, consider supporting us through either our Patreon campaign at patreon.com/MacVoices or by making a one-time donation via the PayPal link on our front page and in the show notes of each episode. You will join these fine people who help bring you MacVoices. Advertising handled by Backbeat Media at backbeatmedia.com. Bandwidth provided by CacheFly at cachefly.com.